The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, insistent drumming against the roof of the old house on the edge of town. The kind of rain that blurs the world into grey shapes and whispers in shadows. Amelia had driven along the slick roads until she saw the familiar outline of her childhood home looming through the sheets of water. She hadn't planned to return, never truly, but her father's sudden disappearance had drawn her back, and the weight of unanswered questions pressed on her like a storm cloud she could never shake. The house was a relic of another era, creaking with age and smelling faintly of mildew and old wood. It felt alive in a way that made Amelia's skin prickle, like it remembered her. The door resisted for a moment, then gave way with a groan that echoed through the empty hallway. She stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing the furniture covered in yellowed sheets, like ghosts frozen in fabric. She called out her father's name. No answer. The house seemed too quiet, too still. The rain outside felt distant now, as if it had been swallowed by the oppressive silence within. She moved cautiously, checking each room, each hallway, every shadowed corner. It was as though the house had shifted since she'd last seen it, walls bending slightly in the periphery of her vision, doorways leading to spaces she couldn't remember, in the living room. Her eyes fell on a photograph she hadn't noticed before. It was of her father, smiling in front of the house, but there was something wrong. His face. It seemed slightly off, almost as if someone had carved faint, subtle marks into it. But the eyes, they were alive, staring straight at her. A chill slid down her spine. She wanted to tear the photo down, but a strange hesitation held her. It felt as though the house wanted her to see it. Then came the whispering. At first, she thought it was the wind rattling the windows, or the rain. But the sound grew clearer, like breath against her ear. Amelia. She spun around. No one. The whisper came again, closer, somewhere in the walls. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself her mind was fraying under stress, that her father's disappearance was making her paranoid. But then the footsteps started, soft at first, deliberate, pacing behind her through the hallways, following her. Every time she turned, the sound stopped. Every time she paused, it began again. She found herself in her father's study, a room that had always been off limits when she was a child. The smell of tobacco lingered, and papers were scattered across the desk in a way that suggested someone, or something, had been rifling through them recently. One sheet caught her eye, a journal, filled with his handwriting. Trembling, she opened it. The entries began normally enough, detailing mundane days, but soon the pages darkened with obsession. He had written about the house, not as a home, but as a presence. It watches, one entry read. It remembers everything. It moves when I'm not looking. I hear its whispering now. I cannot sleep. I cannot leave. It doesn't want me to. Amelia's heart thumped violently. She flipped through more pages. His handwriting grew jagged, almost frantic. The last entry made her blood run cold. I think it wants her. It knows she will come. I am no longer safe. If she reads this, run. Don't look at the walls. Don't. The ink blurred into smudges, as if the words themselves were crying out. The air in the room thickened, pressing in on her. She could hear the whispering again, closer now, surrounding her from all sides. It was not one voice, but many, layered and distorted. Her flashlight flickered. Shadows swirled along the edges of the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human but never fully. She could feel them moving with her, just beyond sight, their presence cold and intelligent. Panic rose, choking her breath. She ran down the hall, the house creaking violently as though it were laughing, and then she saw it, her father, standing at the end of the hallway. But his face was wrong, twisted in a way that made her stomach turn. His eyes were hollow, black voids, yet they held a terrible awareness. He raised a hand, and the walls behind him seemed to pulse, bending inward, breathing. "Amelia," he said, voice hollow, echoing as though it came from everywhere. "You shouldn't have come back." She stumbled backward, tripping over the rug, her flashlight sliding across the floor. The beam caught the corners of the walls, and that's when she realized the truth. The house wasn't just alive, it was him. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow had been a part of him, or perhaps he had become a part of it. The journal had been a warning, but it was too late. The shadows extended toward her, forming hands, faces, mouths opening in silent screams. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The air itself seemed to congeal around her throat. She saw her father's face in every surface, the mirrors, the windows, the dark corners, and each one looked at her with the same hollow, accusing eyes. Then, silence. When she finally opened her eyes, she was outside. The rain had stopped. The house stood as it always had, silent, inert. She ran, not looking back, until the streetlights of town offered a false sense of safety. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every shadow in her apartment seemed to stretch unnaturally. Every sound was amplified. And in the corner of her vision, she swore she could see the walls breathing. Weeks later, she received a photograph in the mail, no return address. It was her, standing in front of the house, smiling. But the eyes, they were not her own. And in the background, just behind her, the outline of her father, or what had been him, pressed against the wall, grinning. Amelia never went back. But sometimes, when the lights are low and the world outside is still, she hears the whispering. It always calls her name, and she knows, with a certainty that chills her to the bone, that the house is patient, because it waits. The first time Mara noticed it, she almost dismissed it as fatigue. The old apartment had always carried an odd chill, a thin layer of frost that settled in corners and lingered despite the heater running. The floors creaked more than seemed natural, especially in the dead hours before dawn. At first, it was the sounds, small, fleeting noises, the shuffle of feet down the hall, or the faint click of a door opening. She told herself the building was old, that the noises were part of its character, but soon the disturbances grew too deliberate to ignore. Her coat, carefully folded on a chair, would be sprawled across the floor. Items she swore she had placed on shelves vanished for hours, only to reappear in places she could not explain. Her neighbors, polite but distant, smiled when she asked if they had noticed anything unusual, and Mara began to feel the first prickles of doubt about her own mind. It started with the photographs. Small, unassuming snapshots pinned to her fridge. She had hung a picture of her mother, smiling in a sunlit garden, and another of her father at the beach. The next morning, she found them face down, backs exposed, as though something, or someone, had deliberately hidden their gaze. Then one morning she awoke to a photograph of herself on the counter, curled in the fetal position, eyes wide, a silent scream frozen in film. She had never taken such a picture. At first, Mara tried to rationalize. She had a roommate for a while, a friend she had known for years, who had moved out abruptly. Perhaps she had returned. But no one ever called, no one ever knocked. Her apartment was empty except for her, a solitude she could no longer trust. Her dreams began to invade her waking hours. In the darkness of her bedroom, she would see the corners of the room shift. Shadows stretched impossibly long, twisting into shapes that were almost human. The air would thicken, cold pressing against her chest, whispering in a language she could almost understand. She would wake in the morning with the taste of copper in her mouth, her sheets damp with sweat, her heart racing, yet no sound had woken her. The tipping point came on a night storm. Rain lashed against the windows with a force that rattled glass, and the wind howled through the cracks in the old building. Mara had fallen asleep in the living room, huddled under a blanket, when she felt it, the brush of fingers against her ankle. She froze, every nerve screaming. The sensation was light, delicate, intentional. She whispered a name, any name, into the darkness, but there was no answer. The fingers traced upwards, slow, deliberate, almost savoring the fear that trembled through her body. She bolted upright and the room was empty. But on the coffee table, a small figure had been placed in the center. At first, she thought it was a doll, a toy left behind by a previous tenant. But it was made of pieces of paper, intricately folded into a human shape, with her name scrawled on its chest in tiny, precise letters. She dropped it in horror. The papers fluttered in the draft like wings. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights. Mara began recording herself with a small camcorder she kept on the kitchen counter. She convinced herself that technology could capture what her mind refused to believe. The tapes were unsettling. Shadows darted across rooms just out of frame, whispers that she could not hear while recording but could replay, faint and jagged, like nails scratching stone. Most disturbing were the brief flashes of movement, a silhouette, blurred, standing behind her, watching her even when she was alone. Then the apartment itself seemed to conspire. Doors she had locked would be wide open in the morning. The bathroom mirror would fog over in patterns too precise for steam, words she did not recognize curling along its surface. And the photographs continued to change. Faces she had never seen stared back from frames she knew well. In one, her mother's smile twisted, eyes hollow, reaching toward Mara as if she had been trapped inside the photograph itself. Mara's friends noticed her retreat. Her calls became desperate, frantic, but when they came to check, they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no disturbance, only a woman pale and trembling, pointing at corners where nothing waited. Some suggested therapy. Others whispered about stress or insomnia. She began to believe them herself, sometimes, but the apartment never ceased its subtle terror. It was on a morning washed in fog, so thick the city beyond the windows vanished into gray. That Mara discovered the truth. She awoke to a noise she had not heard before, not footsteps, not scratching, but a whispering that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She followed it, drawn to the bedroom, where the mirror had changed overnight. In the glass, her reflection moved independently. The version of herself in the mirror smiled, and it was not her smile. It was hungry, knowing, and the eyes were deep black pools that seemed to reach into her mind. Frozen, Mara watched as the reflection lifted a hand, pointing to the floor behind her. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned, and the room was exactly as it had always been, empty, still. Her gaze flicked back to the mirror, and it was gone. Her reflection was normal, unremarkable, her own features staring back with wide eyes. Relief mingled with terror. Relief that it was over, terror that it had ever been there. She fled the apartment that day. She left her belongings, left her photographs, left every trace of herself behind. She moved into a modern building, somewhere safe, sterile, ordinary. Yet the nightmares followed. At night, she would see corners of her new apartment shift, shadows flickering where they should not. She told herself it was trauma, that the brain clings to fear as a habit, that the mind creates monsters to punish itself. Months passed, and the whispers returned. Subtle at first, barely audible, trailing her through hallways. Then came the notes. Tiny slips of paper, folded and placed where she would see them, each bearing a single word: look. One morning, she awoke to find a small paper figure on her pillow. And written on it, in handwriting she did not recognize, was a message that made her blood run cold. I am home now. Mara had thought she had left the apartment, the horror, behind. She had thought she had escaped. But somewhere deep, some part of that building had followed her. Grown patient, biding its time. And now, it had found her again, in her new home, where no one else could see it, where no one could believe her. She sits by the window, staring at the street below, unable to sleep. Shadows stretch and curl around the corners of her apartment. Every sound is amplified, every whisper insistent. And when she moves, she finds herself stepping over tiny paper figures, folded with meticulous care, each with her name written neatly across its chest. They litter the floor like a growing army. And in the mirror, when she dares to look, her reflection smiles back at her with a face that is not her own. Mara knows now that the apartment never wanted her out. It never wanted her to leave. The city, the streets, even the other buildings, they are irrelevant. Wherever she goes, it goes. And perhaps it is not just a place that is haunted, but a presence that can inhabit any space, patient, waiting, folding reality into shapes only it understands. When the phone rings, she never answers. She no longer trusts voices. She no longer trusts shadows. And she can no longer trust herself, because the last time she looked into a mirror, she swears, the eyes staring back at her were not hers at all. Somewhere, far from the old apartment, she whispers a plea to the empty air. She hopes it is heard. But deep down, she knows better, because the figure is patient. And it always comes back,